Hello, everybody. Let's. I got it. I'm the problem, I see. All right. So, that is. The camera's going to have to. I don't know. I'm pretty tall, I guess. 1 Samuel chapter 8 and 9. We are in lesson 297 tonight. If you open your Bibles there, we'll dive into the reading and some of that after we get a prayer in. John, do you have a pre-prayer question? Okay.
Tim and Joy, they're on vacation. They won't be here tonight, but they're going to watch us from Waco, Texas tonight.
Okay. Tim, Joy. I'm sure this will be the best part of their vacation, too. This is going to be a pretty good class, guys, so let's make it worth their while. All right, guys, so let's have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for a wonderful day that you've provided for us. We thank you for the opportunity this evening to join together and study your word. Please bless us this evening as we study chapters 8 and 9 from 1 Samuel. Please help us to grow in our understanding of you. Help us to understand the mistakes, understand the pitfalls that are out there, that we can avoid them in our own lives. Please help us to learn from the successes that we could see from these stories of real people and real decisions and real lives that took place. Watch over all the classes this evening, Father. Pray that all the growth that occurs here this evening would be for your honor and glory ultimately. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, chapter 8, 1 Samuel. Let's read through this chapter. This is really the chapter I want to focus on. We'll get into chapter 9 as well afterwards, but a lot of chapter 9 is a quick narrative introducing Saul into the story of 1 Samuel, and so we'll touch on that, but a lot of the meat of the lesson here in lesson 297 is what we see in chapter 8. So let's read through chapter 8 of 1 Samuel, and then we'll get into some discussion on it. So when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." But this thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing also to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel took the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give them to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king whom you have chosen, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we may be like the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey their voice and make them a king." Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "Go every man to his city." All right, that's chapter 8. So we finished chapter 7. We talked about the accomplishments of Samuel, and we saw his impact over all the people. We saw following the victory in chapter 7, that was going to set in motion a series of events that would show God blessing Israel, having success against the Philistines. Although we mentioned that was taking place over the course of Samuel's life, a lot of his accomplishments over the course of his life, not necessarily that everything took place in this one story. So in setting up the context in chapter 8 of the mindset of the people, the Philistines are still a formidable threat. They are still a nation that has caused them a lot of problems, that is still viewed as a serious opposition to kind of their peace of mind. So it is good to keep that in mind, even though we finished in chapter 7 talking about the Philistines are never going to enter into the land of Israel and have the same dominion that they had before. At this time, it's not that one success has given them this feeling of dominance over the Philistines. So, and it's hard to know exactly how much time has passed between now and then, but we have yet to broach the situation in which Saul will have a lot of the success against the Philistines as well, and then ultimately David after him. But it is good to keep that kind of context in mind of, hey, they still view the Philistines and these other nations as threats against them. So that kind of sets us up where the mindset of the people is going into chapter 8. But the first thing chapter 8 does is set the stage for where Samuel is in his timeline. So what is the description we are given about who Samuel is and where he's at in his life to start chapter 8? Yeah, he's an old man. And what else are we given, John?
But he's home. He's gone home.
Yeah, so he's staying in Ramah, which it had mentioned that was kind of his home base. He would visit some other cities, right, where he would judge Israel, but Ramah was where he was staying, and that's where we'll see him in chapter 8 and in chapter 9, those two stories coming up as well. What other new characters are brought into the story here in chapter 8? His sons. What are his sons' names? Joel and Abijah, right? So they are his two sons, and let's just keep it to a one-word answer. Are they good or bad? Bad, right? One thing I love about like 1st, 2nd Samuel and 1st, 2nd Kings, right, and Chronicles, God doesn't bury the lead on things like that of like, oh, I wonder if how this guy's going to turn out. He lets us know very quickly, and has these authors reveal to us very quickly. It's like, you want to know where this guy's headed, like this is what we're seeing from his actions. And that's not to make it we talk a lot about how, life is messy. You make good decisions, you make bad decisions. It's hard to, I think any of us just say, right off the bat, every person we meet, let's put them in a 1st Kings category of, were you wicked or are you good or righteous or whatever. But I do think this shows us in what we're going to see really through these next several books and with 1 Samuel, is, are you following after what God's saying or not, right? Are you adhering to the ways of God or not? God's not getting caught up into, are you decent to your waitresses and waiters? But you're really mean and you lie on your tax. It's like, are you following after God's ways or not? And that's how Samuel was described, as he was blessed by God. He followed after God. And so the easiest description is, hey, they departed from his ways. And so God, keeps it very simple for us in trying to understand, like, how is he looking at us as people? And I don't see any reason why he would look at us any differently now. When God looks at me as a person, as a soul, is he saying that I walk in the ways like David did, that I walk righteously, or do I walk wickedly? Do I not know the Lord? Do I live a life that is apart from the way God would have me to live? So I do think there is kind of always an interesting line there when we talk about these characters that are quickly described in strong ways. John, you have a comment? Yeah, well, they definitely weren't, because they're dead, but yeah, they... Yeah, I don't know. And it's like, do we sit here and say, like, why was Eli punished so much for what happened with his sons, and like Samuel got his sons here? Is like, there's so many like rabbit holes we could go down. I don't know why, and Samuel's still conversing with the Lord, and the Lord is conversing through Samuel. And so, I mean, I don't take it as Samuel has turned wicked, and or anything like that, right? We're never given that inclination, but his sons departed from his ways. And I believe every example we're given of Samuel shows that Samuel stayed true to his ways, and if he stayed true to his ways, then his example to his kids would have been, this is the way in which you should walk, right? Like every example we're given about how parents and fathers should instruct their children. I have no reason to believe that wasn't how Samuel did, but that doesn't mean that Joel and Abijah didn't have every choice to follow or not follow, and so that's a lot to get into as well.
It was so obvious and so much of a problem to the rest of Israel that they said, hey, Samuel, we got to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one thing I'll say about it that makes me not take this as a slight on Samuel either, is what is their main description of why they are wicked? What are the two? What's the category they're used to describing? What makes them so wicked? What were they doing? Yeah, dishonest gain. They took bribes. They perverted the name, like what they should have been doing. They were set up as judges. They perverted the justice that was being laid down. They were taking bribes to do what they chose to do based on what they were given by others. I lost a chapter. I knew I should have wrote it down, but when Samuel kind of is stepping down from his position, he is described, and he makes all the people bear witness to the fact of, like, I didn't keep anything to myself. You be witnesses, and all the people confirm this. You be witnesses that there is nothing left in my hand. I kept nothing for myself. And they all say, yeah, we bear witness to this. So that is how Samuel is described versus, they, for some reason or another, they have gone completely against it, right? They have completely gone against that. And, why? Why did Judas, who was with Jesus every day, why did he not have the influence that needed to be had? Like, was Jesus a bad teacher? No, obviously not. But it's a strange thing to see. But they're wicked. They took bribes. They perverted justice. I think, John, you hit on the main thing, though. They are so bad that the people realize, like, these guys can't be judges over us. They can't be the authority when you're gone. Eli 2.0, basically. Like, we can't have this go like the last one was heading, and luckily Samuel stepped in and was a bright spot there. So what's their solution to getting around these two wicked men? Give us a king. All right? We want to have a king. Now, I personally take this, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on my opinion. I personally think this was one of those situations where this just lined up perfectly for what they already wanted. This was the best excuse. It was kind of this time of like, everybody's had that moment in your childhood where there are days you don't ask mom and dad because you can see on their face when they get home or whatever, you're like, this ain't the day for my favor. There are other days you're like, they're laughing, they're having a good time, and you're like, the window's open. Like, we've got a chance here, and things could happen. This is when the sleepover is possible. That Wednesday night you're asking to sleep over at your friend's house after church or whatever, in the summer. It's just like, yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, absolutely. Sometimes. Few. No, I didn't, never. yeah, it's just, but it's the idea of like, there's an opportunity. They saw an opportunity. I don't think, and it goes all the way back to Deuteronomy when God said this was going to happen. All right? He knew exactly what they were going to ask for, and he knew what their reasoning was going to be. So in Deuteronomy chapter 17, I just want to read this because it's going to pop up again, and obviously in what we just read. Deuteronomy 17 and verse 14. Oh, dear. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it, and you dwell in it, and then you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother, only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. He shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Verse 18. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing him, that his heart may not be lifted up by his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So he said there right at the very beginning in Deuteronomy, when you do this, when this happens, and he even said right after that, let us make for ourselves a king like the nations around us, which is what they want to do, right? And they don't say it initially, but we read it later on in chapter 8. This is why we want to do it. Let us anoint for ourselves a king, may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. But in verse 20, that we may also be like all the nations. Right? Yeah, when? Right, yeah, he knew it was coming. Right. So the opportunity has presented themselves, and they take full advantage of it. But this time, God, in his interactions with Samuel, which I think is quite fascinating in this chapter, God's talking with Samuel. How does Samuel take the news that, like, hey, we want a king? Make us a king. What's Samuel's response? Yeah, he's upset. He's displeased. Now, he doesn't say directly why, but God's response to him, I think, explains partially his mindset, but God kind of one-ups Samuel. So when God responds to Samuel, what does God say when Samuel comes to God praying about this situation? Because I love this is probably my favorite part in the chapter. Yeah, let's read that again because I do think this is the most powerful verse in the chapter. So in verse 7, The Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Right? So Samuel, and we talked about this a little bit last class about, like, we see all these exploits and these successes, and the people in the next chapter, and we know that doesn't mean like the next day or anything like that, but we see they're going to quickly soon ask, like, Samuel, like, you've been good for us. You know, none of the words that you have said have failed. You know, God's been with you, but we don't want it to go on this way. We don't want things to continue on as they have been. We'd like a king set up for us, right? And so Samuel goes to God with these issues that he's feeling about it, his upset feelings toward it. But God's way ahead of where Samuel is. Where Samuel's just getting to, God's been there. And much like we talked about in Deuteronomy, how he knew this was coming, we see here why. We see here why God knows this was coming the whole time. They've been rejecting me since the beginning. So we stopped at the end of verse 7, but look at where it picks up in verse 8, what God is saying to Samuel. According to all the deeds that they have done. So this isn't just this one-time thing of them coming to you. Hey, they've just been rejecting me during the time of the judges. No. It says, according to all the deeds that they have done, from this day, from the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day. The whole time. This is what it's been leading to, because they have continually rejected me. Now, yeah, we've seen times of success. We've seen times of flourishing. We've seen God bless them, God be with them. But God is saying, like, I've seen them reject me as their king over and over and over again. Go ahead, Jess. Yeah, even before captivity, even before all that. Yeah, promises of things to come ultimately being fulfilled in Jesus, and all these kings that we're about to read about to follow, right, are going to come from Abraham and from that promise. So the theme, the thesis statement, whatever you want to say, from Judges that Tyler mentioned a couple times, I brought up a little bit kind of to echo his thoughts, but what was the phrase that was repeated in Judges over and over again that really showed the depravity of the people? Right. They all did what was right in their own eyes. There was no king in Israel. Each man did what was right in his own eyes. Was there supposed to be a king in Israel? Yes. This is, God says here, I was meant to be the king. I was meant to be your king. This is why it was supposed to be this way. So I wanted to look at a couple of things with this, because I know, God saying these things about his upset feelings toward it, right? Because I don't see, this isn't God saying, hey, this was how I always wanted it to be. I always wanted them to reject me so I could set up a king, right? In the ideal world, just like in the garden, in the ideal world, they choose God, right? So, Jess mentions the fact of the kings coming from Abraham. God saw what was going to happen, but he wanted them to choose him. He wanted them to set him up as their king. And so that was what was in place. Okay? So keep that in mind. God is their king, or he's supposed to be. So what does it mean then? What is the terminology when you have an authority, a governing body, and you as a people say, we want a new authority in power? What is that term called? It's a revolution. It starts with a T. I'm thinking of a T that people would get hung for back in the olden days, and I guess nowadays. Yeah, treason. It's treason, right? What you're saying is treason. To be saying about, hey, like, if we could do this and get the king out of here, what do you. Yeah, mutiny, whatever. There is a clear, they don't think they have a king. God is saying, they're wrong. I am meant to be their king. I have set this up, so I am their king. So we talk about a lot of how there's no king. They had judges occasionally. the judges were never the kings. The judges were never set over God's authority. God was always supposed to be king, ruler, authority. They are now viewing that, hey, he's not really our king. We don't view him that way, to the point that it's like they don't view it as treason. They're viewing it as, hey, like, let's just set up our own king. We've never had one. Just because they're so ignorant of that doesn't change the fact that this is essentially treason, right? They're trying to take God out and put an actual real king in there, is their thinking, right? But everything else, God's saying, I'm king. I set up this nation. I gave them this land. I won them these victories. I won them these battles. And now they're saying, we want somebody else in there. We want somebody else to be king. And so God's just hearing treason, right? That's essentially what is happening. So think about, go ahead, John, so I'll think about what I was going to say. Go ahead. Yeah, sure. So the sons coming up, being a problem, they're afraid. They don't want them to lead them or be judge over them or be the authority, the ruling political force, whatever. So they're taking this moment, though, to still inject what they've always wanted, right? Because of the phrase at the end of chapter 8, to be like all the nations around us. We just saw in chapter 7, though, what did Samuel say? Hey, when he first talks to the entire nation, what does he say they need to stop doing? To defeat the Philistines, what's the first thing you got to do? Put away what? Foreign gods. I mean, assuming I'm terrible with vocabulary, what does that mean if you got something foreign? Where is that from? Not from, yeah, it's not. It's something from outside your borders. So he just told them, hey, you took up other nations. That's what's killing you right now. That's what's causing problems for you. That's why the Philistines are conquering you. Put those things away. Now in this chapter, the mindset is still back to, we got to be like everybody else. We want that. I mean, it sounds dumb to say that, but what's also dumb is the fact of every historian that would read this just separate from, the Word of God, but they just read it from the place of history. Every historian, every person that analyzes structure and government, they would say that this was good for Israel. You know that? Everybody would have said, Israel didn't have a king. Of course they should get a king. They need a king. They need that unifying force to go out and lead them and to defend them and, to make these decisions. So even though we're sitting here being like, that's a really dumb reason, every historian, every person who evaluates history and all these things, everyone would say, oh, they needed a king. Did you know that? They needed a king. They were lost. They had no unifying leader. Every single reason they wanted a king, besides being like all the other nations, God fulfilled that requirement. So the reasons they say that they need this other king. We need another king to judge us. God set the law over the people of Israel. That was the law they were meant to follow. To go fight our battles for us. We just saw in chapter 7, God with a loud noise defeated the entire army of the Philistines. Without the people doing anything, he did that, right? He's already been fighting their battles for them, and they've only lost when he's not fought their battles for them. All right? And so all these problems are going to pop up because they never saw that God was already all the things they wanted. All the things they wanted is what God had, except the thing they mentioned that wasn't on God's characteristic list. God is not like all the other nations. God is the opposite of all these other nations. Unlike all their gods, unlike all their practices, unlike all their desires and lusts and wickedness, God is against that. And that is the thing. When you look at everything else that they wanted, God had it, but he didn't have that thing. He didn't have that one characteristic that Israel valued over everything else, being like everyone else. And I think we realize we have that same temptation now, right? Think of how many, I can't think of tons of, the dumbest things in the world off the top of my head that I've done. I've done a few, but I think about how many times I maybe didn't do something, but I was tempted to do something dumb because other people were doing it. Even though the whole time I was like, this is dumb. This is still dumb. And you just see yourself moving closer to the front of the line. And then you just think I think I'm going to do it though anyway, just because, the 4 people in front of me did it, right? That effect of the masses. But it's like, I don't want to be the guy standing over on the side, not involved here, right? And that's essentially what Israel was. It's like, guys, we're not even in line. Everybody else is in line over here to get punched in the face. We should probably get in line, right? I mean, it's meant to be that dumb. It is meant to be that dumb. And it's funny that it has continued to perpetuate throughout history, because every historian would look back and be like, yeah, they were really screwed up until they got those kings, right? That really doomed them. Luckily the kings came in there and saved everything. It's like, no. The reason, things don't work out is because God has not been placed as their king. The reason every other nation that has set up kings and rulers and authority and Caesars and whatever, they all failed because they're not God. And I don't know, how time's going to unfold, but no matter how great the United States is or any other country, if they get away from God, it's not going to work out. It's not going to be an ultimate undying power, because we already know there's only one of those, and that's God. So I just think that's kind of my fascination with this chapter, is just seeing God give this history lesson of no, they've been doing that. It's been leading to this, right? And we kind of look at the kings a lot of times as like, oh man, David's coming, and oh, this is going to be neat. But God's looking at it as like, this is their rejection of me. This is coming because they rejected me as king. And so the people want to be like everyone else. And the next several books, while there are great moments, and Saul has some high points, and David obviously, and Solomon, what we see is they're going to be like all the other nations. They're going to be just what they ask for. So, very much like God was saying, hey, give them what they're asking. He's going to give them what they ask for. And so I do, before we move to chapter 9, I do want to take a look at real quick at how God says, hey, before you do this though, kind of as a last plea, he lists out all the things that they're really going to get from this, right? So, just to read through my bullet points here, I might have missed one, but I kind of summarize. Take sons, make them soldiers. Take people to plow and harvest his fields. Take men to become blacksmiths, daughters to become perfumers, cooks, and bakers. Take the best from your fields and your vineyards and your own, and give it to his own servants. Take your servants for his own work. He's going to take 1/10 of your flocks. He's going to make you his slaves. So, leader to unite us, someone to go out and fight our battles for us. They listed all these things that this king is what? Going to give them, right? This is what he will give us. The reputation will be like all the other nations. He'll give us that. He'll give us protection. He'll give us unification. He'll give us leadership. He'll give us a solid foundation of consistency, right? Because one thing that's not mentioned in here is when you have a king, you aren't setting up just one king, are you? You're saying their son and their son and their son, on and on, is now king. You're setting up a bloodline to be kings, right? So this is something that is going to continue on, endlessly if they had their way, right? So all these things that this king's going to give us. They're not only going to give us with this one initial king, but all the kings to follow will give us protection, leadership, unity, this familiarity with all the other nations. And all the stuff that Samuel mentions is what? What do all those things have in common? This king is going to take and take and take and take. And, using the kind of the connection with history, right? All these kings, and even, without getting into politics now, right? The big gripe people have generally with politics is they just keep taking our stuff, right? Like taxes, tax on this, tax on, like, they just keep wanting more stuff, They send stuff in the mail saying, hey, we're out of money, give us more money or whatever. But this holds true. Everything that Samuel says to the people is like, this is what's going to happen. You think of all the stuff that he's going to give you. I'm going to list off this long list of things that he's going to take. Your lives will not be the same. Your wealth will not be the same, right? You will lose all these things that you think that this guy is going to protect, right? And I don't think this is necessarily just even talking about the most wicked of kings. I think it's just talking about the idea of a king and this non-God, someone who is not God, being set up in this place of authority. They're going to require some things, and then I think some of this also infers they're going to take extra. They're going to take beyond that to harvest their own fields, their own wealth. They will need your own people to facilitate that. So that's really the main things I saw from chapter 8. Did anybody else have any comments on chapter 8 and something that stood out to them? But I thought the big thing was what God talking about, the history of how they've rejected him, and then showing how we often think things that are going to, these sources that will give to us are really the sources that take the most from us. Go ahead, John. Yeah, things aren't going to stay the same. And that's what happens when there's a change in leadership, right? There's almost always a drastic shift in things. Things do not stay the same. It's very ignorant to say, no matter what business you're saying, things are going to be different. Whether it's the time they send emails or, how cordial they are in the morning or, whatever. If you get a whole new boss to run the whole structure of whatever you're a part of, things are going to be different. I don't care if it's the boss's son or whatever, or his best friend. Things are going to shift, right? Because it's not the same. And so they think everything's going to stay the same except improve because now they'll have a king. But God was offering them all the good, and he wasn't taking from them all these things as well. Go ahead, Dad.
We don't talk very much about pride and life. We think of pride as just arrogance from an individual. But this is about the pride of life. And the world enslaves us, obviously, Satan. And our commitment to Jesus frees us. And it's what we deal with every day. It's people we know that sin and leave. Hopefully that's none of us, but they're giving in very often. Sometimes it's the lust of the flesh. Sometimes it's the lust of their eyes to see and covet. But very, very often it's the pride. They want to be like everyone else. They can't. They don't have a sense of themselves to say, no, I am who I am, and I'm willing to give this to God and trust him. And it's very common. It's very sad. It's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I think so much of what Dad's touching on there about the pride of life is that when it is about us, it's the world offers all these things that are about you, and Christ's thing is hey, first thing you got to realize is it's not about you, right? It's about me, right? It's about Christ and what he's done for you. And now we can be in life and we seem, like a lot of the psalmists do, where you're just like, but everything seems so good for those other people out there, right? And I always forget what psalm it is, but I always love, it's like Psalm 80 or 40 or something like that. But it always talks about how and then I perceived their end, right? And it's when you see where that gets them, all the enticements fade, right? All the things fade away. And if people could see where we are going, all the enticements would be there for them. That everything would become clear of why we're here and why we serve God and why Jesus is worth it, right? But it's flipped now. We can get all these immediate satisfactions out there to satisfy me and what I want. Everything that Christ is offering, and I'm not saying we don't get any satisfaction being here amongst, but the true ultimate revealing is yet to come, where people will be like, yeah, I should not have picked that. That was a bad choice, right? Everybody's picked the wrong food items and filled up their plate at a buffet before you got to the end where they put the best 4 things. And you have to regret that you have to stuff your face and go back and get it, right? I'm going to have to eat extra to get back here and taste those things. But in life, right, we get swallowed up by the things that we think are important because we want to satisfy us. And the first thing Christ tells us is you got to put that person to death. And it's about satisfying Christ. And what Christ wants for us is ultimately what's best for us. And what deep down, if we truly had, everything laid out in front of us and we understood, that's what we'd want. But some people, they get blinded by it. The people here are blinded by that, being like everyone else. Any more comments on chapter? Oh, sorry, Scott. Yeah, everything happens for the most part what they want, and for them what they want, but God also, everything that God warned them were pitfalls become the pitfalls. It's going to say in a few chapters how, Saul goes out and fights their battles for him. He does the job that they wanted. God supports him and is with him. But yeah, the pitfalls come because, like the people, the king was still meant to answer to God. God was going to appoint that king, and what he said in Deuteronomy 17. He was still meant to be the authority, but when the kings lose sight of who is their true ruler, then the same problems over and over and over again happen, except now instead of judges, they're called kings. So it still comes as a cycle again. Go ahead, Katrina.
You fast forward to the first century and then beyond to 2024, and you read Romans 13. And God has set up authorities. He established it, He started it, and it's continuing today. We have presidents and governors and mayors and people in authority. We have bosses. There's always going to be leaders and people in authority over us. Policemen, firemen, whoever that might be. God says, honor to honor and fear to fear and custom to custom and pay taxes to taxes. And, that's established. That's from God. We have to obey them. And unless if they tell us to kill so-and-so, we can't do that, obviously. But we have, God set that up. God set that up. And, reading Romans 13, I don't, we may not agree with the governments, but He did set that up and all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, man screws a lot of things up. I don't know. But yeah, we still have responsibilities there, but yeah, it's not as God would have preferred it if we would have just, right? But we wanted to be like everybody else. So, John, and then did somebody else have their hand up over here? I keep feeling like I'm missing. Go ahead, John.
And you know, as we run out of time, so we're just talking about the ninth chapter. You know, everything just sort of starts to fit together as Samuel and Saul get together there in the ninth chapter.
Yeah.
They come from this area, they come from this area, but they all come together, just like
Yeah.
God wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Dad, did you have another comment? Or?
I was just going to go along with what Katrina said, that Jesus said all authority was his. He's instituted this, but he gave government guidelines. And one is, rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. And that's not always true in government. And that means that government would be illegitimate in God's sight, just like Saul was. Saul was still government, but he was illegitimate. And God's, of course, got all authority, and his authority is good for us. But unfortunately, governments don't oftentimes keep what God has instituted them for. And so he will destroy them. He'll remove them eventually.
Yeah.
And of course, we see that over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, seeing how there are government structures in Scripture that are set up, and we'll see it with the kings that are set up, where it works and the people flourish because it all still comes back to, and why every single king is started out being described as, did they follow in the ways of David, or did they not? Did they follow after the God? Did they know the Lord their God, or did they not? Because everything still goes back to that. And we knew just from that one statement, everything else would work out. If you have one king and he subjects himself to God, I'd follow that king. I'd follow that king today, right? But the thing is history and people nowadays, they don't think that way. I can't think of one ruler and authority doing that because, no, like everybody's evil and out for number one. So we got to disperse it, right? So I get nowadays it's like the idea of a king seems antiquated and dumb, but it's like, yeah, it's awful if they're not subjecting themselves to God. But it's the same thing with any government. It's all going to go bad if it's not about God, if God is not the focal point. And so touching on chapter 9 real quick, we see this story with Saul and his servant, and they're out looking for some lost animals, and eventually we see God's hand a part of this and how he leads them eventually to Ramah. We don't know that at the beginning. It's kind of almost laid out as we got to go to this nearby city. We've got to meet this seer. Who is this guy? And then eventually you hear the word Ramah, and then once you know Ramah, you're like, I bet that's Samuel. And lo and behold, it is Samuel that they run into and meet, and this seer was supposed to tell them, where the donkeys went, right? And instead, he ends up getting told, well, forget about those donkeys. Donkeys are fine, but you're going to be king, right? He doesn't mention it in chapter 9, but spoiler alert, chapter 10, it's going to happen very quickly, right? But we see God's hand as a part of this. He's with Saul. He's going to be with Saul. He's supporting this choice here as the king. He tells Samuel, hey, that man is the one I have chosen. And he even uses this phrase, which I wish we had more time to talk about, but it says, he will be the one to restrain the people, right? I thought that was kind of an interesting term of, not lead the people, not guide the people, not protect the people, but he'll restrain the people, is how my version said it. But Saul, tall, head taller than everyone else in the nation, handsome, good looking, and yet he comes from, like a lot of kings that we're going to see in Scripture, humble origins. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. We already know their history and a lot of suffering they've been through, but the way he describes his own tribe, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm from the lowliest clan of the tribe of Benjamin. We're insignificant compared to any other tribe. Like, why me? It's nothing, right? But he's the one that's chosen by God. He's the one who is going to be their king. And so we'll see him anointed, and we'll see him proclaimed king next class on Sunday. So lesson 298 on Sunday, guys. Make sure to pick up the questions. They're back there, and we'll jump into chapters 10 and 11 on Sunday. Thanks, everybody, for your comments.